Welcome to Crypto 101, a first principles jargon-free course on blockchain and its impact on financial services. In the previous lesson, we began learning about decentralized finance. We are currently learning about one such DeFi application called Uniswap. In this lesson, we will continue with our discussion of this decentralized exchange. In the previous lesson, we covered 2 of the 5 concepts needed to understand Uniswap. In this lesson, we will continue learning about the other 3 concepts. To incentivize token holders to contribute their tokens to the pool, Uniswap issues pool tokens to liquidity providers in proportion to the token quantities they contributed to the pool. Pool token holders are entitled to receive a share of the fees paid by traders on every trade. Liquidity refers to the ability to sell an asset without drastically altering its price. In the absence of a large inventory of the asset being bought, the buyer will experience a large increase in price. In the previous lesson, we referred to this phenomenon as slippage. Pool tokens serve to reduce slippage by inducing token holders to contribute their tokens to the liquidity pool inventory. At this point, we can clarify the distinction between 2 types of tokens. The deposited tokens are contributed by token holders into the liquidity pool. Pool tokens are issued to depositors into the liquidity pool. Deposited tokens can be either Ether or any ERC20 token. Pool tokens in version 2 of Uniswap are ERC20 tokens. Version 3 brought about a major change in the nature of pool tokens. We will cover it in the next lesson. Deposited tokens are minted by the smart contract of the token sponsor, not by the decentralized exchange smart contract. Pool tokens, on the other hand, are minted by the exchange smart contract and confer an entitlement to trading fees derived from the ownership of the deposited tokens. The mechanism by which pool tokens work underwent a significant design change in 2021 when Uniswap version 3 was launched. In this lesson, we will learn how pool tokens in version 2 worked. In the next lesson, we will learn of changes in version 3. The number of new pool tokens minted every time a liquidity provider makes a contribution to a token pair is determined by a formula. In Uniswap version 2, it is the square root of the depositor's K. Consider Alice to be the first contributor to a Uniswap pool. She contributes 1 token of type A and 100 tokens of type B. The K for Alice is 100. The number of pool tokens minted is the square root of 100, which is 10. Bob is the second contributor. Assuming the market price of A and B remains the same. He contributes 8 tokens of type A and 800 tokens of type B. The K for Bob is 6,400. The pool tokens issued to Bob is the square root of 6,400, which is 80. Hence, Alice has 10 pool tokens and Bob has 80 pool tokens. The total number of pool tokens minted is 810. Alice accrues 1.2% of all trading fees and Bob gets the remaining, assuming there are only 2 depositors. In case Alice or Bob want to withdraw their reserves from the pool, the percentage of the global reserves they can withdraw is the percentage of global pool tokens they have at any point of time. We will revisit the concept of pool tokens shortly. Now it is time to move on to a very important concept in decentralized exchanges called impermanent loss. Impermanent loss is the difference between the gain a liquidity provider accrues by contributing to the liquidity pool versus the gain accrued by simply holding on to the tokens. Next, we will illustrate this with an example. Consider Alice, who has contributed 10% of a liquidity pool of Ether and Tether. The market price of 1 Ether is 1,000 Tether. Since 1 Tether is equal to $1, the total value of Alice's holding is $2,000. The market price of Ether, outside Uniswap, suddenly doubles to 2,000 Tether tokens. Now, the Ether in the liquidity pool is suddenly cheaper than the market. Hence, traders start arbitraging between the pool and other exchanges. Bob is a trader. He sells Tether into the pool till the ratio between the tokens represents their market prices. He receives 2.93 Ether in return for 4,142 Tether tokens. Effectively, Bob pays 1,414 Tether per unit of Ether, while in a centralized exchange, he would have to pay 2,000. Bob can now take this Ether bought from the pool and sell for a higher price at a centralized exchange. Once the new equilibrium is reached, there is no further trade arbitrage possible. In the new equilibrium, Alice owns 10% of the liquidity pool. Continuing with the assumption that 1 Tether equals $1, the value of Alice's holdings increased to $2,828, as compared with her beginning position of $2,000. The value of Alice's holdings went up because the price of Ether appreciated compared to the price at which she had contributed to the liquidity pool. Let us compare 3 values. The market value of 1 Tether remains $1 across the 3 scenarios. In the beginning, the market value of Alice's tokens was $2,000. Post-trade, it increased to $2,828. But what if Alice had not contributed to the pool at all and merely held onto her tokens? The value of her tokens would now be $3,000. In this example, Alice's impermanent loss is the difference between $3,000 and $2,828, which is $172. It is loss accrued by the act of contributing to the pool. This brings us to 3 questions. What is the cause of impermanent loss? Second, why is the loss called impermanent? Third, why do liquidity providers assume the risk of impermanent loss? Next, we will answer each question in turn. The first question we will answer is on what causes impermanent loss? In our illustration, Bob was able to acquire Ether from the liquidity pool at the exchange rate of 1 Ether equaling 1,400 Tether. On the other hand, the actual price of 1 Ether had appreciated in centralized exchanges to 2,000 Tether. Hence, while Alice made a gain, she did not make as big a gain as she could have, had she not contributed to the pool. Impermanent loss is caused by volatility in the relative market price of the two assets held within a liquidity pool, which causes deviation between the exchange rate in the liquidity pool and the prevailing rates in centralized exchanges. Consider 2 scenarios. In one scenario, the token pair consists of Ether and Tether. In another scenario, the token pair consists of 2 stable coins, Tether and DAI. In the first scenario, the market exchange rate between the 2 tokens outside the pool will be much more volatile than in the second scenario. Since Tether and DAI are both stable coins, their relative values will fluctuate within a narrow range around $1. Hence, the impermanent loss risk faced by the liquidity providers will be much lower in the second scenario. The exchange rate at which the liquidity provider deposits to the pool on day 1 will not deviate by a large amount from the exchange rate on centralized exchanges on day 5. However, this also means that there will be far fewer arbitrage opportunities for traders in the second scenario. Hence, the volumes of trade processed will be lower. This means that the liquidity provider will earn lower fees. Why is the loss labeled impermanent? Next, we will answer this question. To answer this question, we will go back to the starting point. What if Ether's price had depreciated instead of appreciated? Assume that the market price of 1 Ether fell from 1,000 to 500 Tether tokens. Next, we will see what occurs. It would make sense to sell Ether to the liquidity pool because one can get 1,000 Tether tokens in return, as compared to 500 Tether tokens from centralized exchanges. The trader in our illustration brings the pool to a new equilibrium by buying Tether and selling Ether to the pool. This is the exact opposite of what he had done in the earlier illustration when price of Ether had appreciated. Next, let us calculate the value of Alice's holdings pre- and post-trade. The value of Tether in US dollars remains the same, which is $1. As expected, the value of Alice's tokens has gone down. However, has it gone down more or less than the hypothetical scenario where she never contributed to the pool? Next, we will answer this question. We can now calculate the impermanent loss. We can see that in this case, Alice incurs an impermanent loss of $86. Next, we will review the significance of this. At the starting point, the market exchange rate was 1 Ether to 1,000 Tether. The impermanent loss at this point is 0. In one scenario, the market price of Ether increased to 2,000 Tether. The impermanent loss was $172. In another scenario, the market price of Ether decreased to 500 Tether and the impermanent loss reduced to $86. We can see that the amount of impermanent loss changes as the relative external market price of the 2 tokens fluctuate. We can now answer why the loss is labeled as impermanent. The impermanent loss of liquidity providers can potentially be reversed as the relative market price of the token pair fluctuates. However, there is no guarantee that will happen. In this example, if Ether continued to appreciate, impermanent loss will keep growing. Further, if the token holder withdraws her tokens from the pool prematurely, then the impermanent loss becomes permanent. The final question is, why would a liquidity contributor incur the risk of impermanent loss? The incentive for incurring the risk is the chance to earn fees. Every time a trade occurs, the pool contributor earns a portion of the trading fees paid by the trader. The fees earned may be sufficient to offset any impermanent loss. The illustration in this lesson relates to Uniswap version 2. In the next lesson, we will discuss some important changes made to fees in version 3. It is time now to make an additional refinement to the constant product market maker formula. Consider a liquidity pool that begins with the following positions. For the first trade, a trader wishes to sell 1,000 Tether tokens into the pool to buy Ether. For the new equilibrium, the trader receives about 0.99 Ether from the pool. Next, we will see how the trading fees plays into this. The trader needs to pay 30 basis points of his input as trading fees. If the trader wishes to sell 1,000 Tether tokens to the pool, he needs to pay 3 additional Tether tokens to the pool. In an earlier version of Uniswap, namely, version 2, these 3 tokens get added to the reserves of the liquidity pool. Next, we will see how. For the first trade, Bob must pay sufficient Ether so that the target K remains 1 billion. However, after the first trade is executed, the supply of Tether is increased by 3 tokens, which represents the fees. All else remains the same. Hence the target value of K now increases for the second trade. The Uniswap protocol thus reinvests the fees into the liquidity pool. This is similar to how mutual funds give investors the option of reinvesting interest and dividends. Now, when the second trade occurs against this liquidity pool, the new K should remain constant. The target K for the third trade will increase further by the trading fees incurred from the first and second trades. The cycle keeps repeating itself. We originally said that the constant product market maker algorithm requires that K should remain constant before and after any trade. We can now make a modification and say that K should remain constant before and after any trade with the assumption that no fees is applicable. However, the value of K for the subsequent trade will increase by the amount of the trading fees of the existing trade and the cycle repeats itself. We can now see that the trading fees keeps getting added to the reserves of the liquidity pool, which are owned by the liquidity providers. It is similar to how banks may capitalize interest to our bank balance. In version 3 of Uniswap, this changed and fees are no longer added to the reserves balance. We will learn more about this change in the next lesson. Consider Alice, who began with contributing 10% of the pool. We can compare her pre-trade token balance with post-trade token balance. At any point of time, she can withdraw 10% of the tokens from the pool. Thus, we can observe that in version 2 of Uniswap, the fees are reinvested into the liquidity pool on behalf of the liquidity provider. When a trader views the price of a token in the liquidity pool and compares it with the market price in other exchanges, she must account for 3 costs she will incur. First is slippage. Second, is the trading fees that is paid to the pool. Third, is the gas fees that traders, like everyone, must pay for processing a transaction. The profits from arbitrage must be sufficient to pay for these costs. We have now covered 4 of the 5 concepts critical to understanding Uniswap. The next concept regarding Uniswap we will cover is concentrated liquidity. However, given the relative complexity of this topic, we will defer learning about it to the next lesson. Meanwhile, review the summary of this lesson. I will see you soon on the other side.